I think these are all fantastic talks, and all of us that are seeing patients with epilepsy and others are very interested in this area and realize there's a lot of potential for us to really help with patient care. But I would invite people that are involved in development of these devices and otherwise. This is your chance to, pick the brains of some really fantastic experts and others up here about how you might think about development and otherwise. So I'll open the floor to questions. Jackie. And anybody online, if you'd like to ask a question, please do so, and you can turn on your camera so we can see you as you ask your question.
Good morning, and
I think you're on. Just it comes on its own, I think. Yeah.
good morning, and thank you so much for the very interesting talks. My question is to Paul. You talked about using machine learning and the idea of like trying to use all sort of data to help patients. When we use machine learning, essentially we're building all the biases into our algorithms. For instance, we know there are a lot of biases against people of color. Traditionally, they are misdiagnosed, and Noah also mentioned that. So how are you going to go about this problem? Because if we're using the data that is available, definitely we're building the biases into our model, and people of color and minorities will be basically facing misdiagnosis.
Can you guys hear me okay? It's working? Okay. It's a great question. And, it's very easy for bias to, get into the models that we're developing. And we've been really working hard to make sure first that the data that we are using is representative of the populations that we're applying the models to. And in particular, it's then important to then proactively reach out and make sure we're partnering with different communities to ensure that we're actually filling in some of the gaps. And in the case of ophthalmology I was talking about, you're correct that initially the data had some very strong biases, but we were able to move that forward. And in fact, as we went into both India and then in Thailand, we redid many of the studies around the modeling to make sure we were pulling in local data for those as well. We've had examples also where we have to sometimes change our approach completely. One of the early features that the research team is working on is how to use a mobile phone to automatically collect vitals. And so one of the algorithms that someone produced was the ability to simply have the camera point at the face, and it can actually detect a little bit of a slight color change pulsing, so it could actually pick up heart rate pretty accurately in some skin tones, but not all. And what we found though, that a better model was if you can put your thumb over the actual camera directly on the back of the phone, that had a higher sensitivity and better performance across all skin tones. So the team actually abandoned the first model and it's been going forward with the second model. So something we have to be very proactive about. And in every model we're building, we've got to make sure we're reaching out to different communities, looking at whether it's different minorities or which may have different genetic makeups or different skin colors for things like dermatology or the image-based stuff. So incredibly important and something that we really have to be proactive about.
Okay. Online question. You want to? I did see a hand up and then it went away on my computer here. So.
Hi. Hello. Hello. Oh, sorry.
Okay, Philip.
Hi. Hi. Thank you. This question is for Paul again. Thank you for the background on the machine learning. As a naive person, the first thing I think about with epilepsy, with machine learning, is these fantastic seizure detection programs we have in our EEG labs. the one we use is Persist, and it works pretty well, but it's obviously not perfect. I wanted to know, like, what is happening in terms of development? Is there development of like more accurate programs or more sensitive programs? Because there's still a lot of, like, I guess noise that comes through, as good as they are. Kind of do you know anything about the kind of going forward where that's heading?
Yes. So I'm not super familiar with specific. I think you're talking about detection of seizures directly, and I'm not super in the details on that research. But the modeling that is being produced, one thing that's been interesting is as the amount of data increases and as the size of the model starts to increase, that often it can be possible for some of these systems to detect or find patterns that weren't initially obvious to the scientists or the researchers. We actually had one example that was quite interesting where we had an intern who had joined this ophthalmology team, and one of the first things that we wanted to have her do was like, well, just learn how the machine building blocks kind of work. So try to put the stuff together and predict something that you can't predict. So she says, great, I'll run all the algorithms and I'll try to predict the biological sex of the patient. And so she ran this all, and it should have come back with a 50-50 kind of accuracy rate. And instead, she came back and said, "Whoa, I have a 65% accuracy on predicting the biological sex." And all the researchers were like, "No, you're doing it wrong. You're overfitting the data, et cetera, et cetera." And she goes, "Okay." So she came back a couple weeks later and she goes, "Now I can predict it with 85% accuracy." and all the ophthalmologists and we were like, "We better take a look at this." And so sure enough, it turned out that by just looking at the fundus image, we can actually begin to predict things like the age, biological sex, and now we're starting to apply it for cardiovascular risk. And there's some interesting analysis there. So I think as one thing that I see that as good, well-curated data sets start to become available, and you start to get that back out to the research community, that using these new sets of tools, there are often things that we're going to be finding that maybe we didn't know were possible before. So I'm very excited about that work. And I think a lot of it is going to be around how do we pull those data sets together, but I'm not specifically aware of the work going on in this space.
Hey, okay, Paul, I'm just going to add one
Please.
thing you might be interested in. So one of the first historical descriptions of fundoscopic examinations was by John Hewlings Jackson. And so he actually saw a few vascular changes during seizures that he used to then just described, like he did many things in epilepsy. So the fundus can tell you many things. Right?
It's an amazing gateway into, the cardiovascular nerve system. It isn't a pretty impressive thing. So.
Okay, I think another Roy Alterman online.
Hi, yes, I'm here. First of all, I'd like to comment on Dr. Jackson being able to see the retina while a person is having a generalized tonic-clonic seizure. I think that's quite remarkable in terms of clinical skills. But my comment is, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Westerhennen, Dr. Westerhennen, is that correct?
Yeah, almost.
You did better than I did.
Or with word attack skills, always been a problem. But anyway, just a personal comment or personal observation. And that was in your survey, I believe you indicated that parents were less concerned about the physical appearance of the device. They placed accuracy above that. And I would say to you that I have had flat feet all of my life. And as a elementary school student, I saw a podiatrist that prescribed a pair of orthotics for me. which required that I wear a tie shoe, with laces, when all the kids in school were wearing what were called Basswegians, which was a penny loafer kind of thing. I absolutely hated having to wear these tie shoes and felt so self-conscious. I would say that your parents need to be a little more concerned about the appearance of the device, because if the child doesn't wear it, then it doesn't really do a lot of good. That's my comment.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie, yep, please go ahead.
So while we're talking about detection devices, I was having a conversation at breakfast actually, and I wanted to open it up to the larger group. When I first heard about devices that were implanted for seizure detection, I think I thought, and other people probably thought, oh, this is going to bring us to where cardiology is, where you can implant like a detection device, cardiac detection device, and people will walk around with it, and we can figure out who's having seizures over the long term. And the thing about those cardiac devices is it's set it and forget it, right? You implant it, it's there, you walk around for 2 years or whatever, and then eventually you need the battery replaced. Whereas, our devices for detection, yes, you have some implanted, mechanism, but it is then connected to something that, if you get 2 or 3 days of battery life, you're in really good shape. So the whole purpose of having it in the head, as opposed to on top of the head, seems to be lost by the fact that you have to keep replacing the battery or charging the battery. In those cases, it seems like the only reason that you would have it implanted is if the implantation shows you a better signal than what you could get outside, right? And in some cases that's true, but we were hearing yesterday that in some cases it really, makes a very small localized area where you can record from, whereas you could probably put chiclets all over the head and record from more places externally. So, I just want to open up the question of, is it always better to have something implanted in the head? People are not going to, I don't think, and I just want to hear what people say, people are not going to be charging these things and doing it for the rest of their lives. People just don't do that, or will they? And I want to know what Anouk says. I want to know what Noah says, as we and also some of the people who are going to be defending the cranial devices as we think this through.
Yes, thank you. I think this again emphasizes how important it is to ask people, to ask people with epilepsy, ask their parents, and not just make assumptions about what we would think that they need. So I think that's the first lesson we should learn. And I can think both ways, that people would like to have it really non-obtrusive under the skin, something that might be like, it's a bigger operation, maybe more risk, but once it's there and nobody sees it, it's non-stigmatizing. Okay. Okay, but maybe it's less, it can be less big when it's under the skin. I don't know. Maybe it helps.
Yeah, I might also comment that I think there's a couple of factors. I think as the parent, the thing at the top of my mind is it going to work and is it going to help? And if it's going to work and it's going to help, I mean, you can put it in my head, right? Like I'll do anything for my kid, right? And so I think the issue sort of secondarily is what is the risk of the procedure itself, right? And so one of the parental experiences which has differed is the kind of information and briefing we got before craniotomy versus the kind of information we got before, right, a stereotactic EEG. And what's interesting is how much more comfortable the medical teams are in describing the risks you're facing for stereotactic. So I think from the parent's perspective, they're going to really be interested in, like, again, like, can I help the child? And also, honestly, what is the risk that my child is going to pass away from this procedure, or that my child's going to be permanently harmed in a very significant way? But what's maybe counterintuitive is that, at least in my mind, the stigma issues, they're very real and very significant. And I think if someone says something stigmatizing, it is. In our experience, we haven't experienced that, right? So my son wears braces on his ankles. He has a shoulder supination strap. Sometimes he's had other stuff on him. Kids are curious at his age, but they've just been curious. And what I'm almost more worried about from something on the outside is the day-to-day living. So, I'm the one who gets in the shower with him and helps him scrub his head, right? If everything is subcutaneous or it's below the skull, I can teach him to be more independent and teach him to do his own head scrubbing, or it's easier for me to do that. If I've got to work around a device that's attached to him, or I'm worried it's going to get wet or it's going to get damaged, or there's some issue in that sense where the day-to-day living is harder, that would tilt my decision-making towards favoring something that is implanted as opposed to something external.
Morning, thank you. That was great presentations. Adjacent to what we're talking about, because we're talking about someone has epilepsy, how do we monitor it? But I lead a rare disease, a genetic epilepsy group, and this is applicable to many. Like when I started this work a few years ago, kids had seizures and got their genetic diagnosis. What we're starting to see now is kids are delayed, kids have motor issues, kids get a genetic diagnosis, and the parents know from the natural history, my child is going to start seizing, but they're not seizing yet. And they will often be nocturnal. So what I get asked a lot is, what device can I put in my kid's bedroom so I can store all the sleep? Because the seizures, as everyone in this room really knows well, the seizures progress slowly and the sleep is where it first shows. What we all want as parents is a device, Google Nest camera would be great, where I can store all of the sleep records, hopefully get some body temperature, some abnormal movement, and then some AI that I can pay a monthly subscription to that will tell me, over time, your child's movements look like this, and the evolution happened here, here, and here. Maybe it's time to go to a neurologist. So easy question for you. When is that coming to market, and what can I buy today?
Yeah. So
I'm Trisha. I'm from Epilepsy Education Everywhere. And I'm back a question about the concept of appearance and children being self-conscious about how they look, if it's external. I can speak from the perspective. I've had epilepsy for 30 years. It started when I was 10. And so I can give a children's perspective as well as an adult perspective on this. And the biggest thing about it was it would be, I don't know if this has been done yet, but you might want to take a survey from the children about this. And the biggest picture is the fact that, and again, is the organization that we do is about epilepsy awareness. And we all know, I don't have to preach about how important awareness is. And this is one reason. I know what it's like to get picked on. I know what it's like to get harassed. I know, like when I had brain surgery and head shake, bar here, I understand what it's like. And so the biggest factor, the biggest way to help it, and really, I don't want to say the only way, but the most important way is to talk to other parents about, like, if as much as possible. I know that it's hard for working parents, but the more parents talk to other parents whose child don't have epilepsy, and the more kids talk to other kids, it's about how the communication is more than anything. So the more aware the other children are, the better. And it is hard. I've worked with hundreds of kids. I understand, but all we can do is just keep this awareness going more and more and more, and encourage the children to not judge, to understand, and to teach them like what is going on and why. And the more we do that, the less self-conscious we have to worry about the kids being, and the less, you know, the odds of them wanting to take off their bracelet or anything like that. So really, really, really more, you gotta emphasize it as much as possible.
Thanks a lot for the comments. Listen, I think we have time for one more question, and I think circling back, is it Tim Buckings from Epi Hunter had some comments he'd like to make.
Hello, good morning to you. I'm sorry I can't turn on my camera. I have some technical issue. So I'm the founder of Epi Hunter, and our first product we have on market is for absence seizures. By many considered not that impactful to life, but what we have noticed is that the invisibility of those seizures is very impactful to children in the classroom, for instance. And so the question, and we use consumer wearables, consumer EEG for that. And what we have learned is that for those type of seizures in that setting, that in many cases, and I absolutely don't want to be black-white because there are many nuances, but that the parents are more concerned with stigma than the children themselves. And what we see a lot happening is that they start to use Epi Hunter at home, but that the child asks to take Epi Hunter into the classroom, because what Epi Hunter does for them is make visible what happens underneath their skill. It explains to other people why they react differently at certain moments. And what we have experienced multiple times is that bullying is not increased, but bullying stops thanks to having something strange on your head. And that happens because what we've seen is that it happens because the bullies start to understand at what moments the child reacts differently than from other moments. And they gain information, they gain knowledge, and that gives them power, that gives them some positive power. And then I'm going to shut up, but then what happens is they take that information to the playground, and they become the protectors of that child on the playground, because they recognize more easily on the small nuances that the child is having an absence seizure. So what I want to say, and another aspect is, I very strongly believe that wearables are in a consumer journey, if we may call it this way, precursor of implants. And we can give them digital tools already with a wearable, and perhaps we should focus also on continuing to give them those digital tools later on when they have an implant. And this is much longer than I can speak for this, but.
Thank you. Thanks for your input. Good insights there. Well, I believe that our time is up for this session. So I want to thank all the speakers. Fantastic job. Very interesting session.